Since the start of COVID-19, everyone's been busy with their garden projects, but an increase in demand for soil has affected the supply.
So it turns out this year there's actually a soil shortage in our area. The producer that we use to get soil from, they compost and then they mix it and you get a 50-50 mix, great soil. They actually told us that they're gonna be out of soil until August because their soil sales have doubled. They doubled from last year. Last year they went up. And the reason for all this soil shortaging that's going on with them is not the inputs. They have plenty of inputs, although they did say that food waste went down a lot last year because of the pandemic. People were wasting less. But that's not all they use for all their inputs with their compost and soil creation. These larger composting and soil companies are able to break things down that, you know, a lot of us can't do in our gardens. But they said that it's mainly just people buying soil to plant their own food. It seems to be, they thought, you know, last year when it took off, it was, you know, just because of the pandemic, but then they've seen it continue on to this year. Of course, we do know, if you've watched this channel, that a big part of that is the simple fact that everything's going up in price. Food prices are going way up in price. So people are growing their own food. Which reminds me, you know, if there's a soil shortage right now, it's springtime. That's when a lot of people are trying to get things in the ground. It's almost summer. But if we're dealing with these shortages in soil right now, what's going to happen when it comes around to that time of year when we're harvesting and putting things in mason jars? So I think that the mason jar shortage is back in 2021 as it was in 2020. So I thought I would show you guys what I'm doing in our garden, because I know that when you watch a lot of YouTube channels, you see a lot of this fancy no-till stuff where people are bringing in kind of a 50-50 mix. Hold on, I think there's a smudge on the screen there. Get it? Kind of. Oh yeah, that's much better. So I thought I'd show you guys what I'm doing, because you've seen a lot of these fancy no-till gardens, like I was just saying, and they bring in a lot of 50-50 mix to create mounds over weed fabric and other things, like cardboard boxes. But as you can imagine, they have a lot of inputs. When you're talking about buying 50-50 soil mix, trying to get enough ground covered to create a substantial garden, and you could do what we did. We started out with 2 raised beds, and I'll give you guys a garden tour a little later once everything starts really getting going here. We started out with 2 raised beds, and we added 2 more raised beds, and then on the other side of that, we've started to build another kind of above ground bed. I don't know if I'd call it a raised bed. So this isn't really a raised bed. These boards will eventually come off after we build this area up. But we put a tarp down over this entire area, and then we put cardboard down. So this is going to be very weed free, but as you can tell, we've already had more inputs, cardboard, and then each one of these mounds that you see here is a 50-50 mix of compost, soil, and then in between the mounds we did our hardwood mulch. So this is a little less expensive. If you were to fill this whole thing with dirt, you'd be looking at a significant amount of money. We barely used a truckload of soil to build these mounds, and then this hardwood mulch, you know, as the year goes by, it's going to start to break down and decompose into the ground here, and so will the cardboard underneath. The cardboard will eventually disintegrate, but the concept here is that we will continue to build this up for a couple of years. We'll put fresh compost over the tops of these mounds each year, and we'll add additional mulch to it each year. And after a while, you're gonna have this built up, and it's gonna be a pretty strong bed. And I would honestly say we've spent the most amount of soil in the raised beds. And when you're talking about some of these no-till gardening techniques, something you have to remember is when you bring in a 50-50 mix, 50% of that is soil that has been dug up somewhere. So those are things to consider. It's not necessarily, you know, all that great if that's what you're doing each year, but at the same time, you are benefiting the, you know, I guess the environment, because you're contributing to a composting system. Somebody's taking massive amounts of food waste and other things and composting them. That's why I like using the 50-50 mix that we use. But again, that's a lot of inputs. That's a lot of inputs that some people just don't have. Some people don't have access to truckloads of soil. Some people don't have a truck. So then you're buying soil by the bag, and that can get really, really expensive as well. So what I've done on this front bed here, that looks like a weedy mess, and I work on this daily actually, but this front bed is basically what I did was I tilled it up. Now I'm going to tell you what my plan is with this so that you have a better understanding of how I'm going to make this work in years to come. When we talk about farmers switching from till to no-till, the advantage that they have is cleared land. They already have cleared land. All they have to do after their corn crop is plant a cover crop, and then they can start the no-till process. They can start implementing things to keep the weeds down. When you're starting out fresh, like me, you can't do that. And so you almost have to till it up. Now, when you're talking about tilling and we're talking about soil, soil quality and how bad tilling is, we're talking about years and years and years of tilling that create the problem that we have with our topsoil today. This area behind me hasn't been tilled, and really it was this entire area that I'm standing on. It's real flat. We have 1, 2, 3 of these on this side of our property. They were all chicken houses at one point in time. So the soil that's down there is like fill dirt type stuff, clay. When you look at the grass that was growing here, and I think that this is one of the biggest problems we have in a lot of fields today, but when you look at this grass, look at the roots. The roots don't go down very far. They kind of get meshed, and it's almost like they get forced out to the sides. What this grass represents is a lack of topsoil. There's no topsoil here. When you look over here, I've got a lot of red clay, and it's just super hard, dry. It almost gets rock hard when it's out like this. Very little topsoil in here at all. This is mainly just rocks and hard red clay. So I've had to amend it a little bit, and I've had to do something about the weeds. So I went ahead and I tilled this up. I used our middle buster to kind of rip in deep initially, and then I went over it with a cultivator to try and break it up a little more. Ended up hitting it with the rototiller, and eventually, you know, I had just dirt, which is what I wanted to start out with. But I didn't use any chemicals or spray. If you wanted to do this a little faster, you could hit it with a pass of Roundup before you till it up and let everything die off, and then kind of till it up and mix it in. But I don't like using chemicals if I don't have to. You could also cover the area that you want to turn into your garden with a tarp. We've done that. We did that at the far end of the garden where we're adding on to that end. And unfortunately, we just don't have an unlimited supply of $80 tarps. So I couldn't use a tarp at this end. So I tilled it up, and I tilled it up several times to really try and break up the roots and get a lot of the junk out of there that I didn't want in there. Because what I'm doing now, this is going to become a competition issue between the plants I want and the plants that have been trying to grow here for years. Okay, so now that we've gone through the whole tilling process, what I did was I came in and I've planted this out. On my far end, I have giant mangrove beets. Those are actually for animal feed, although you can eat them as well. And then I have like a couple squares kind of on this side. So I have the beets, I have some soybeans, which we're gonna harvest young, so it's edamame. And then we have some barley. And so those are my first kind of 3 squares. And then behind them, I have several rows of corn, and I have different types of corn. I mixed my corn in. I've got sweet corn, I've got popcorn corn. I have some old Indian maize grain, and they're all different colors. So I think my corn is gonna look very pretty when I'm done. It's gonna be all different, it's gonna be all sorts of colorful. It's gonna be nice. So I've got the corn growing on that side. Some of you guys don't like growing corn. I think corn and barley are a great combination for all sorts of things. And then on this front section here, I planted a lot of pumpkins. I've got 1, 2, 4 rows of pumpkins, different sizes. The row closest to me are like the big jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. And I think that, you know, the fall is such a fun time for everybody. And I know that so many people get mad at me when we celebrate things like Christmas and Halloween, but it's fun for the kids, and you know, I just like doing it. So I figured, you know, we'd grow some pumpkins, we'd have some fall decor and some Halloween decor. And I'm gonna have a lot of pumpkins. Then I have 2 rows of watermelon and 1 row of melon in here. And as these things have sprouted up throughout the garden, I've been coming in with mulch and mulching in around them. So as I see the seed start to sprout up, I put a little bit of mulch around it in a circle. And as the next seed sprouts up, I put a little bit of mulch around it in a circle. And then as I get a row and I get another row, I go in between them with mulch. So the only thing that I'm spending money on here, the only input I have so far besides my seeds, is the mulch. And I haven't even used a full truckload of mulch so far. I have been just slowly bringing in mulch as I need it. As we work on our other garden beds where we have more inputs, anything that's left over, I've just been throwing it on here. Mulch is probably the least expensive thing if you think about it. You can, you know, put down a few inches of mulch and it's gonna help you with your weed control pretty well. It'll help suppress the weeds. And that's why I'm doing it. I'm suppressing the weeds and giving my plants, I'm trapping the moisture in the soil with the mulch, and I'm giving the plants that I want to grow a better chance of succeeding. So the faster I can get them up and healthy, the less chance that some of the old grasses and stuff that we're trying to grow here are gonna be able to grow. And I go through on a daily basis, I pick a section, especially sections once I know where all the seeds have come up and I can put the mulch down. And I pull up any grass roots that I can find, and then I put the mulch down. And it's been working fairly well for me. The areas that I have put a good amount of mulch down, I really haven't had a whole lot of weeds coming up. The corn, I think once the corn gets big enough, nothing's really gonna be able to compete with the corn. I think the same goes for the soybeans. Once those plants really get going, they're gonna drain the soil, as well as my beets. Now I did, when I planted the smaller seeds, my barley, my soybeans, my beets, and my corn, I did throw down 2 bales of straw. When I planted the melons and the pumpkins, I used 0 straw. The other thing that I did do is I kept, Shauna plants a lot of marigolds around her gardens each year. And last year, after they all died off, I went through and collected all the flowers. And I separated the seeds out of the flowers, and I put a ton of marigold seeds. They go all the way around the border of my garden, in between, they're starting to pop up in random places in between the different crops. Marigolds are a great pest deterrent, so I'm using marigolds for that purpose. And my goal here is to build up my organic matter in the soil that I already have. It's the cheapest way to start a garden. And after this year, I'm not gonna till this back up again. What I'm gonna do is continue to develop it the way that I am. And what's gonna happen is throughout the season, the growing season, these plants, especially the pumpkins and stuff, they're eventually gonna shade this and keep a lot of the weeds down for me. And so the mulch is just kind of a temporary solution for that. But this is hardwood mulch. And it's actually, I buy it from the company that we buy our soil from. And so it's gonna decompose fairly quickly. By the end of the season, a lot of this mulch will have decomposed and become organic matter in the soil. So the soil that I started off with, which was bad fill dirt, is getting that mulch throughout the season. And then anything left over from the plants. You've heard this a lot. You don't want to clear your garden at the end of the season. You want to try and leave things in there if you can. And that's because bugs will hibernate throughout the winter in different shoots of things. My plan is that when all this is done for the year, I'm gonna plant a winter legume from this entire square here that you see. And I'm gonna let that winter legume grow up. Our sheep are right next door. You can see where the fence line ends there. We're gonna continue that across. And I'm gonna put a little gate for the sheep right across from the garden so that I could just run a little electric fence around this whole thing and allow the sheep to come up here and graze out the winter legume when I put the legume in there. And that will give them a nice fresh food source over the wintertime. And it will also provide me with some added nutrients to my soil, and they're gonna eat everything down for me. And then they'll eat down that winter legume for me, and I can start planting again next year. And what I'll probably do is just kind of line out beds and put my seeds in the ground and let it start to grow up from there. And then I'll again come over it. The only input I'll have next year is some mulch around the seeds, mulch as it comes in to help suppress the weeds. But I'm also slowly building up that organic matter with the mulch, because mulch is great. I mean, they use it in compost all the time. I may also take, you know, some compost and mix it in. I might do some compost rolls. We've started our own compost pile, but we haven't gotten that far with it yet. So I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to depend on that at the beginning of next year. And I don't think I'm going to need to, not with the way I'm going to manage this with the legumes, with the ruminants over top. I'll let the chickens come in here. I think that I'm going to be okay with just the system that I'm setting up and maintaining it year over year. So this is something that you can do. It's not as easy as starting out with fresh dirt. It's not as easy as starting out with 50-50 mix. I'll admit that. It's definitely, you have a lot more weeds. It is tilling up the ground because you're having to mitigate your own soil. You're having to make something of what you have. But after a year or two of doing what I'm doing, I guarantee you this is going to be some really good planting dirt. It's going to be fantastic planting dirt. And I'm probably always going to do the same types of crops over here. Some of the things like corn and barley and you know, I don't think we'll ever do soybeans on a larger scale, but you know, definitely the corn and the barley, the types of grains and stuff like that. I may end up creating plots out in the pasture, in which case I'll do the same thing. I'll till it up like this, and I'll start it out and start the seed bed, start growing it, and then over the winter time throw a legume on there, let the animals graze it out, let the animals graze out the waste from the year, and then just start the whole process over again. So I've got a system down. It's a long-term system, but I think it's really going to work out well for me. And we'll see as time progresses how something like this does compared to the raised beds, compared to our other kind of mound garden. And I'll do a full garden tour for you guys in the coming weeks as we get more of this complete. We've had a late start getting gardening this year, but it's been exciting to see everything start to come up and our plans finally starting to work out. If you've been watching this channel, it's taken us a while to get our garden the size that it is now, but it's a good, I don't know, I'll measure it out and I'll tell you how big it is when we do the garden tour. But it's about 100 feet by 40 feet, if not more, to the end of the garden to where I'm standing. And we've got a roadway right along the side there. And shout out to Black Hat Ranch. I had to put a drainage ditch in where the road is to drain water away from our workshop building that we're building. And so I had this big drainage ditch, and I didn't have a pipe to go in it. And pipes can be expensive. So we just left it open as a ditch, and we've been jumping the ditch to come over and work. As you can imagine, anytime you need to get any equipment over here, we'd have to drive it around. And so that's kind of been difficult for us, but they actually had just an extra pipe on their property that they let us have. And so I stuck that in the ground, and I'll be filling that in over the next week or two. And so we'll have a nice drive right up alongside our garden. And then our final step is we've got our compost down at the far end. We're gonna have greenhouses out just behind where the camera is. You are right over here. And then I'm putting in the beehives, which are gonna be along the side. And then along the wall, we've got all sorts of fun fruit trees and stuff and fruit bushes that I'm gonna be putting in. So we'll be creating kind of like between us and the world, we'll be creating kind of a food forest wall, is my vision anyway. So this is what I'm doing. If you run into a soil shortage, or soil prices are just too high and you feel like giving up and you're afraid of tilling up the ground, doing it once isn't going to kill it. And really, in about 3 or 4 months after I've gotten this whole thing covered again, my microbials are going to be back to normal, if not stronger, with what I'm doing here. So it'll work out just fine. And I would definitely suggest using the straw for your seeding and the hardwood mulch as seeds pop up, because you've got to retain moisture into your soil somehow. Otherwise, your plants are just going to die. If you leave it bare and open like this, you could actually see from looking at the ground as it starts to dry out that the ground just starts to crack and pull apart. So the mulch and the straw really kind of help that. Anyway, stay tuned. We've got more videos for you on the way.